The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Tabitha Whitley made her way down the dusty main street of Silver Gulch, Montana Territory. 1878. Not because they respected her, but because no one wanted to stand too close to that strange Whitley girl who carried nothing but wore a peculiar expression of determination on her sun-kissed face. Whispers followed her like a shadow as she walked past the general store, her threadbare dress swaying gently in the autumn breeze. "There she goes again, empty-handed as always," Mrs. Peterson whispered to her companion. "No basket, no parcels. What kind of woman travels with nothing?" Tabitha pretended not to hear, but the words stung like salt in a fresh wound. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the whispers, but familiarity didn't lessen the pain. Her fingers itched to reach for the small locket hidden beneath her collar, the only possession she had left, the only thing worth carrying, but she kept her hands still at her sides. Showing weakness in Silver Gulch was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. "Maybe she's simple in the head," another voice suggested, loud enough to ensure she heard. Tabitha quickened her pace. 3 years in Silver Gulch since her parents' passing from fever, and still, the townsfolk treated her like an oddity. They didn't understand what it meant to lose everything, to have your life reduced to nothing but memories and a single treasured keepsake. The town's newest establishment, the Rusty Spur Saloon, loomed ahead. Tabitha had avoided it since its opening 6 months prior, but desperation now guided her steps. The sign in the window read, "Help Wanted," and hunger was a persistent companion these days. After losing her position at the dressmaker's shop the previous week, "Customers don't trust a girl who carries nothing," Mrs. Hargrove had explained. Tabitha needed work, even if it meant serving drinks to rowdy cowboys. She paused at the entrance, smoothing her dress and taking a deep breath before pushing through the batwing doors. The saloon was quieter than she expected for midday. A piano sat silent in the corner, waiting for evening revelry. Behind the bar stood a middle-aged man with a mustache that seemed to have a life of its own. A few patrons nursed drinks at scattered tables, and in the far corner sat a lone cowboy, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. "We don't serve unaccompanied ladies," the bartender said without looking up from the glass he was polishing. "I'm here about the position," Tabitha replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The sign in your window." The bartender finally looked up, eyes narrowing as he assessed her. "You're the Whitley girl, aren't you? The one who carries nothing?" "Yes," she finished for him, chin raised slightly. "But I work hard, learn quickly, and know how to keep accounts." A low chuckle came from the corner where the lone cowboy sat. He stood up, and Tabitha got her first good look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his denim shirt. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with eyes the color of the sky after a storm. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw on the right side. "Frank," the cowboy addressed the bartender, "give the lady a chance. Anyone brave enough to face down this town's gossips deserves at least that much." Frank's mustache twitched in displeasure. "Stay out of my business affairs, Blake. Just because you delivered my whiskey shipment doesn't mean you can tell me how to run my saloon." The cowboy Blake shrugged and stepped closer. "Then I'll hire her myself. My ranch could use someone with good accounting skills." Tabitha's eyes widened. "Your ranch?" "The Triple H, about 5 miles west of town," he replied. "Name's Blake Holbrook. Bought the place last spring." Frank snorted. "And you think folks will take kindly to you hiring the town oddity?" Tabitha flinched, but Blake's expression remained unruffled. "I've never much cared what folks think," he replied, then turned to Tabitha. "The position includes room and board at the ranch. Work's not easy, but it's honest, and nobody will whisper behind your back, at least not on my property." Tabitha's mind raced. Leave town for a remote ranch with a man she'd just met. It seemed reckless. And yet, what future did Silver Gulch hold for her but more ridicule and rejection? "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. "You don't even know me." Blake's lips curved into a smile that transformed his entire face. "Let's just say I recognize something in you that I once saw in myself. Besides, my foreman's been after me to find someone who can keep the books properly. I'm terrible with numbers." "I would need to gather my things," she said cautiously. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "I thought you carried nothing." Heat rose to Tabitha's cheeks. "I have very little, it won't take long." "I'll wait here," Blake said, returning to his table. "Take your time." The tiny room above the apothecary that had been Tabitha's home for the past 3 years looked even more sparse as she prepared to leave it behind. A small trunk contained her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, a brush, and a faded daguerreotype of her parents. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother, carefully pinned her honey brown hair into a neat bun, and fastened her mother's locket around her neck. Mrs. Delaney, the apothecary's wife and Tabitha's landlady, appeared in the doorway as Tabitha was closing her trunk. "So you're leaving us," she said, her tone unreadable. "Mr. Holbrook offered me a position at his ranch," Tabitha replied, straightening her shoulders. Mrs. Delaney's eyes widened. "Blake Holbrook, the Triple H owner?" When Tabitha nodded, the older woman's expression softened. "Well, that's unexpected. They say he keeps to himself mostly, comes to town only when necessary, polite enough but doesn't share much about his past." "Do you know anything about him?" Tabitha asked, suddenly realizing how little she knew about her new employer. "Only that he paid cash for that run-down ranch, fixed it up proper, and now runs one of the more successful operations in the territory. No family that anyone knows of." Mrs. Delaney hesitated, then added, "Be careful, child. The world isn't always kind to young women alone." Tabitha nodded, touched by the rare display of concern. "Thank you, Mrs. Delaney, for everything." The older woman helped her carry the trunk downstairs, where Blake was waiting with a wagon outside. He lifted the trunk as if it weighed nothing and secured it in the back. "That's all?" he asked, and for a moment, Tabitha braced herself for more mockery. Instead, he simply helped her onto the wagon seat and climbed up beside her. "Traveling light has its advantages," he said conversationally as he flicked the reins. "Makes it easier to move on when needed." As the wagon pulled away, Tabitha felt the eyes of Silver Gulch watching her departure. For once, she didn't mind their stares. Let them watch. Let them wonder. She was moving forward, even if she didn't know exactly where she was heading. The journey to the Triple H ranch took just over an hour. As they crested a hill, Blake slowed the horses, allowing Tabitha her first glimpse of her new home. The ranch house was larger than she expected, a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Blake's expression warmed with pride. "It wasn't when I bought it. Previous owner let it go to ruin. Took a lot of work to get it looking decent again." As they approached, a lean, gray-haired man emerged from one of the outbuildings. Blake introduced him as Thomas, the foreman who had been with the property even before Blake purchased it. "Miss Whitley will be handling our accounts and correspondence," Blake explained. "She'll be staying in the small room off the kitchen." Thomas gave Tabitha a respectful nod. "About time we had someone who could make sense of those ledgers. The boss here can run a ranch but can't add 2 and 2 without taking off his boots." Blake laughed, and Tabitha found herself smiling at their easy camaraderie. The room that would be hers was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a small chest of drawers, and a window overlooking a vegetable garden. After helping her with her trunk, Blake showed her to an office adjacent to the main sitting room where ledgers and papers were stacked in haphazard piles. "As you can see," he said with a sheepish grin, "I wasn't exaggerating about needing help." Tabitha ran her fingers along the spine of a ledger. "I'll have it organized in no time." "I have no doubt," he replied, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Dinner's at 6. The cook, Mrs. Winters, is a bit particular about punctuality." Left alone in the office, Tabitha took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something like hope. Here, perhaps, she could start anew, be defined by what she could do rather than what she did or didn't carry. She began sorting through the papers, quickly developing a system for organizing the ranch's records. Hours passed unnoticed until a bell rang, signaling dinner. Tabitha hurried to wash her hands and smooth her hair before joining the others in the dining room. The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Besides Blake and Thomas, there was Mrs. Winters, a robust woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner, and two ranch hands, brothers named Joseph and Samuel Fletcher. The conversation flowed easily, with talk of cattle prices, weather predictions, and local news. No one stared at Tabitha or whispered behind their hands. No one commented on her lack of possessions or questioned her presence. After dinner, as everyone dispersed to their evening routines, Blake invited Tabitha to join him on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. "I hope your first day has been satisfactory," he said, leaning against a post. "More than satisfactory," she admitted. "Everyone has been kind." Blake nodded, seeming pleased. "Good people, all of them. Loyal too." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the colors deepen across the horizon. Finally, Tabitha gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since their meeting. "Why did you really hire me, Mr. Holbrook?" He considered her for a long moment. "Blake, please. And I meant what I said earlier. I recognized something in you." He paused, his gaze moving to the distant mountains. "When I first came to these parts, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a handful of dreams. People judged me for it, made assumptions. I swore if I ever found success, I'd remember what it felt like to be on the receiving end of those judgments." Tabitha felt a connection forming between them, thin but tangible. "The town. They think I'm peculiar because I don't carry a basket or parcels when I walk. They don't understand that after losing my parents and our home, I learned the hard way that things can be taken from you in an instant. The less you carry, the less you stand to lose." Blake's eyes, when they met hers, held understanding rather than pity. "Some wounds aren't visible, but they shape us all the same." That night, lying in her new bed, Tabitha thought about the strange turn her life had taken. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without the weight of tomorrow's judgment pressing on her chest. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Tabitha spent her days organizing the ranch's finances, writing correspondence, and gradually expanding her duties to include inventory management and supply ordering. Blake was often out with the men, checking fences, moving cattle, or handling the countless tasks required to keep the ranch running smoothly. When their paths crossed, their interactions were friendly but professional. Yet Tabitha found her thoughts drifting to him at odd moments, wondering what had caused the scar on his jaw, how he had accumulated the capital to purchase the ranch, what dreams kept him working from dawn till dusk. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that suggested he might have questions of his own. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Tabitha was closing the office when she heard raised voices from the main room. Blake and Thomas were arguing, something she had never witnessed before. "You can't just ride in there alone," Thomas was saying, his normally calm voice tight with concern. "Dawson and his men won't listen to reason. They're looking for any excuse." "I don't have a choice," Blake replied firmly. "If they're damming the creek that feeds our north pasture, we need to address it now before the cattle suffer. At least take Joseph and Samuel with you. And risk escalating the situation? No, this needs a diplomatic approach." Tabitha stepped into the room, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Both men fell silent, turning to look at her. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Blake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Just a water rights dispute with a neighboring rancher. Nothing for you to worry about." But the tension in his shoulders told a different story. Tabitha had learned enough about ranching in her time at Triple H to understand that water access could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. "Perhaps I could help," she offered. "If it's a matter of documentation or legal rights, it's beyond that stage," Thomas interrupted grimly. "Dawson doesn't care about legal rights. He cares about power, and he resents that the Triple H is flourishing while his operation struggles." Blake sighed. "I'll ride out tomorrow morning, alone," he added with a pointed look at Thomas. "I'll be back by nightfall." The foreman muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Tabitha slept poorly that night, troubled by the concern she had seen in Thomas's eyes. At breakfast, the atmosphere was tense as Blake prepared to leave. On impulse, Tabitha followed him out to the stables. "Be careful," she said simply as he saddled his horse. Blake paused, looking surprised by her presence. Then his expression softened. "I always am." "I've come to value my position here," she continued, feeling suddenly awkward. "I wouldn't want anything to disrupt it." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Is that your roundabout way of saying you'd miss me if something happened?" Heat rose to Tabitha's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Perhaps it is." Something shifted in Blake's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his vest and the faint scent of soap on his skin. "Then I have an even better reason to return safely," he said softly, before mounting his horse and riding away. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Tabitha tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to Blake, imagining confrontations with the hostile rancher. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. By dusk, rain was falling in heavy sheets and Blake had not returned. Thomas paced the front room, periodically checking the window despite the darkness outside. Mrs. Winters prepared a stew that remained largely untouched as the evening wore on. When the grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, Thomas grabbed his coat. "I'm going after him," he announced. "Not in this weather," Mrs. Winters protested. "You'll get lost in the dark and the rain." "I'll wait until first light," he conceded reluctantly. "But if he's not back by then, I'm riding out, storm or no storm." Tabitha hardly slept, listening to the rain hammering against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. She had just drifted into an uneasy slumber when a commotion downstairs jolted her awake. Throwing on her robe, she rushed to the landing in time to see Thomas and Joseph helping a soaking wet. Mud covered Blake through the door. "What happened?" she gasped, hurrying down the stairs. "Ambush," Blake grunted as they lowered him into a chair. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, dark with what could only be blood. Dawson's men were waiting, didn't even get a chance to talk before they opened fire. Mrs. Winters appeared with bandages and a basin of water. "Let me see that arm." As she unwrapped the crude bandage, Tabitha caught sight of the wound, a deep gash that looked like it might have come from a bullet grazing his flesh. She felt suddenly light-headed. "Tabitha," Blake's voice cut through her rising panic. "Would you fetch my whiskey?" "Top drawer of my desk. Thomas knows I keep the good stuff there." The errand gave her a moment to compose herself. When she returned with the bottle, Mrs. Winters had cleaned the wound and was preparing to stitch it. Blake accepted the whiskey with a grateful nod, taking a long swallow before offering the bottle to Mrs. Winters to sterilize her needle. "Hold him steady," the cook instructed Thomas and Joseph. Blake's jaw clenched as the needle pierced his skin, but he made no sound. His eyes found Tabitha's across the room, and he gave her a strained smile. "I told you I'd be back," he said, his voice rough with pain. "You're later than expected," she replied, trying to match his light tone despite the fear still coursing through her. "Had to take the long way around after they shot my horse out from under me," he explained. "Poor beast, he was a good mount." Mrs. Winters finished her stitching and wrapped Blake's arm in clean bandages. "You'll live," she pronounced, "but you need rest and plenty of it." "That arm needs time to heal." The next few days were tense as everyone waited to see if Dawson would follow up his attack with further aggression. Blake, confined to the house on Mrs. Winter's orders, grew increasingly restless. Tabitha took to bringing her work to the sitting room so he could review it without moving around too much, and they fell into the habit of working together in companionable silence. On the third day, as a gentle rain pattered against the windows, Blake set aside the breeding records he had been reviewing. "Tell me about your parents," he said unexpectedly. Tabitha looked up, startled by the personal nature of the question. "They were good people," she said after a moment. "My father was a carpenter, my mother a seamstress. We weren't wealthy, but we never wanted for anything essential." "And they died in the fever outbreak, the one that hit Silver Gulch 3 years ago," she nodded, her throat tightening, "along with a quarter of the town. I was visiting my aunt in Helena when it struck. By the time I returned, they were already gone. Our house and everything in it had been burned to prevent the spread of disease." She touched the locket at her throat. "This is all I have left of them. My mother was wearing it when she fell ill and the doctor saved it for me." Blake's eyes followed the movement of her hand. "That's why you carry nothing," he said softly. "You already lost everything once. It seemed safer somehow to keep nothing that could be taken away." She hesitated, then added, "But I'm beginning to think that was a mistake. To live without attachments is to not really live at all." Blake reached across the space between them to take her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. "It takes courage to care about things or people when you know how easily they can be lost." Their gazes held, and Tabitha felt something shift between them, a barrier dissolving. The moment was broken by Thomas entering with news that riders had been spotted approaching the ranch. Blake was on his feet immediately, pain forgotten. "How many?" "5, including Dawson himself," Thomas reported grimly. "Get the men together, guns visible but not aimed. I want to talk to Dawson, not start a war." Despite Mrs. Winter's protests, Blake strapped on his gun belt and stepped onto the porch to await the riders. Tabitha, ignoring his instruction to stay inside, followed him out. If there was going to be trouble, she wouldn't cower in the kitchen. The 5 riders approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance from the house where Blake stood flanked by his men. Victor Dawson, a heavy-set man with a bushy red beard, nudged his horse forward. "Holbrook," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Surprised to see you on your feet after our little encounter." "It takes more than a couple of bushwhackers to keep me down," Blake replied evenly. "What brings you to my property, Dawson?" "Just wanted to deliver a message personally. That creek you're so concerned about. It runs through my land before it gets to yours. That makes it mine to do with as I please. Water rights in this territory follow the doctrine of prior appropriation," Blake countered. "My ranch has been using that water for cattle since before your grandfather was born. The law is on my side." Dawson spat on the ground. "Law don't mean much out here, as you well know, but I'm a reasonable man. I might be persuaded to let the water flow, for the right price." "I don't respond to extortion," Blake said, his voice hardening. "But I'm willing to discuss a fair arrangement that benefits both our ranches." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "You've got 1 week to come up with an offer that interests me. After that, I dam the creek completely and your north pasture becomes a dust bowl." As the riders turned to leave, Dawson's gaze fell on Tabitha standing behind Blake, his lips curled into an unpleasant smile. "Well, well, I heard rumors you'd taken in Silver Gulch's oddity, the girl who carries nothing." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Be careful, miss. Holbrook here doesn't have the best track record when it comes to protecting those close to him. Ask him about Kansas sometime." Blake's hand moved to his gun, but Thomas stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Not worth it, boss." With a final sneering laugh, Dawson and his men rode away. "What did he mean about Kansas?" Tabitha asked when they were alone again. Blake's face had gone hard, the warmth she had come to appreciate completely absent. "Nothing that concerns the present situation," he said curtly, turning to go back inside. "It concerns me if I'm to trust you," she persisted, following him. "Especially after what just happened." He stopped, his shoulders tense. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer. Then, without turning, he said, "I had a wife once in Kansas. She died because of my poor judgment in a situation not unlike this one." The revelation stunned Tabitha into silence. Blake Holbrook married. She tried to reconcile this new information with the solitary, self-contained man she had come to know. "I'm sorry," she finally said. Knowing the words were inadequate, Blake nodded once sharply and continued into the house, effectively ending the conversation. That evening, Tabitha found herself unable to focus on her work, Blake's revelation weighing heavily on her mind. After dinner, she wandered onto the back porch, seeking solitude to sort through her thoughts. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Mind if I join you?" Blake's voice came from the doorway behind her. She turned, surprised. "Not at all." He settled beside her on the porch steps, his injured arm resting in a sling Mrs. Winters had fashioned for him. For a while they sat in silence, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "Her name was Eleanor," Blake said finally, his voice low. "We were married for just over a year when drought hit our part of Kansas. A dispute over water rights escalated quickly. I thought I could reason with our neighbor just like I thought I could reason with Dawson. I was wrong." Tabitha remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "While I was meeting with him in town, his sons set fire to our barn. Eleanor, she tried to save the horses," his voice caught. "By the time I got home, the fire had spread to the house. I couldn't reach her." "Blake, I'm so sorry," Tabitha whispered, her heart aching for him. "I sold what was left of the property and drifted for a few years. Worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, whatever would keep me moving. Then I came across the Triple H run down, nearly abandoned but with good water and better grazing land. It felt like a chance to start over." He turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from the house. "I didn't plan on caring about anything or anyone again. It seemed safer that way." "I understand that feeling all too well," Tabitha said softly. Blake's hand found hers in the darkness. "And yet here we are." The simple touch, the weight of his hand on hers, felt more significant than any words they might have spoken. They sat together under the stars. Two people who had learned the hard way that life offered no guarantees, finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding. The week that followed was marked by increasing tension as Blake and Thomas strategized how to deal with Dawson's ultimatum. Options were discussed, and discarded legal action would take too long. Paying Dawson would only encourage further demands. Direct confrontation risked violence that could devastate both ranches. Tabitha, meanwhile, had an idea forming, but she hesitated to voice it, unsure how Blake would respond. Finally, 3 days before Dawson's deadline, she approached Blake in his study. "I think I might have a solution to the Dawson problem," she said carefully. Blake looked up from the map spread across his desk, eyebrows raised in surprise. "I'm listening." "When I was organizing your correspondence, I noticed letters from the territorial governor thanking you for your hospitality during his visit last year. How well do you know him?" A slow smile spread across Blake's face as he caught her meaning. "Well enough that he might take an interest in a water rights dispute that threatens the stability of the region. Tabitha Whitley, you are brilliant." She felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "I also found records indicating that the Triple H water usage dates back to 1846, well before Dawson's family acquired their land. If the governor were to send a representative to investigate." Blake was already reaching for paper and pen. "Dawson wouldn't dare interfere with an official inquiry, and once our prior claim is officially documented, his leverage disappears." Tabitha finished. Blake stood and, without warning, pulled her into a one-armed embrace. "You are remarkable," he murmured against her hair. The unexpected contact sent warmth spreading through her body. Before she could respond, he had released her and was already drafting the letter to the governor. Blake's letter, dispatched by special messenger the next morning, received a prompt response. The governor not only remembered Blake favorably, but was concerned about reports of increasing tensions between ranchers in the territory. He promised to send his legal representative within the week, and in the meantime, issued a temporary order preventing any alterations to existing waterways pending official review. When Dawson and his men arrived at the end of the week, expecting payment or confrontation, they were instead met with a copy of the governor's order and the news that an official investigation was imminent. "This isn't over, Holbrook," Dawson snarled, but the defeat in his eyes belied his words. Blake remained calm. "Actually, Dawson, I believe it is. The law is clear on prior appropriation, and we both know whose claim predates whose. You're welcome to contest it through proper legal channels, of course." Dawson had no choice but to retreat, his attempt at extortion thwarted. As his party disappeared down the road, the tension that had gripped the Triple H for weeks finally began to dissipate. That evening, the ranch celebrated. Mrs. Winters prepared a special dinner, and even Thomas unbent enough to join in a toast to their victory. Throughout the meal, Tabitha was aware of Blake's gaze returning to her, something new and warm in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. After dinner, as the others drifted away to their various evening pursuits, Blake approached her with an unusual request. "Would you ride with me tomorrow?" "There's something I'd like to show you." Tabitha hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Tabitha, dressed in a riding skirt Mrs. Winters had altered for her, met Blake at the stables. He had saddled 2 horses, his own new mount, a sleek black gelding and a gentle mare for Tabitha. "You look like you were born to ride," he commented as he helped her mount. "My father taught me when I was young," she replied, "but it's been years since I've been on horseback." "The body remembers," he assured her, swinging into his own saddle with the ease of long practice. They rode westward, following a trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. Blake set an easy pace, mindful of Tabitha's rustiness and his own still healing arm. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the landscape painted in the rich golds and reds of changing leaves. After about an hour, they crested a ridge, and Blake drew his horse to a halt. Before them stretched a view that took Tabitha's breath away, a secluded valley nestled between gentle hills, a clear stream winding through its center. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches of sunlight, and at the far end, a small cabin stood beside a stand of ancient oaks. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "This is part of the Triple H, but separate from the main operation," Blake explained as they rode down into the valley. "I found it after I bought the property. The previous owner either didn't know about it or didn't care. The cabin needs work, but the foundation is solid." As they approached the cabin, Tabitha could see that, despite its weathered exterior, it had a certain charm, a covered porch facing the stream, windows that would catch both morning and evening light. Blake dismounted and helped Tabitha down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. He led her to the porch, where a bench had been placed to take advantage of the view. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said as they sat down. "It reminds me that beauty can exist alongside hardship, that life continues even after loss." Tabitha understood what he meant. The secluded valley felt timeless, untouched by the sorrows and struggles that marked human existence. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. Blake turned to face her, his expression serious. "Tabitha, when you came to the Triple H, I thought I was just hiring help. I didn't expect." He paused, searching for words. "I didn't expect to find someone who would understand the parts of me I've kept hidden for so long." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his eyes. "I didn't expect it either. For years, I've been defined by what I lacked: parents, possessions, a proper place in society, but you've never seen me that way." "How could I?" He reached for her hand. "From the moment I saw you standing in that saloon, chin raised despite the whispers all around you, I knew you carried something far more valuable than material possessions. You carried dignity, resilience, hope." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes, but they were different from the tears of shame and loneliness she had so often shed in Silver Gulch. These were tears of recognition, of being truly seen. Blake lifted his free hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed away a tear that had escaped. "When I lost Alina, I thought I'd never care for anyone again. The risk seemed too great, but you've shown me that a life without connection is no life at all." "You've shown me the same," Tabitha whispered, leaning into his touch. The distance between them disappeared as Blake drew her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative in exploration rather than a demand. When they parted, Tabitha saw her own wonder reflected in Blake's eyes. "She was mocked for carrying nothing," he said softly, "but now you carry my heart." The simple declaration, spoken in the quiet of that hidden valley, felt more binding than any formal vow. Tabitha knew in that moment that she had found not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. They spent the day in the valley, talking of past sorrows and future hopes, discovering the joy of shared dreams. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the grass, Blake spoke of his plans for the cabin: repairs to make it weathertight, furniture to make it comfortable, perhaps a garden come spring. "Would you help me with it?" he asked, a vulnerability in his question that touched Tabitha deeply. "Not as my employee, but as more," her answer was in her smile, in the way she laced her fingers with his. "I'd like that very much." They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, a new understanding between them. The future held uncertainties, as it always did in the untamed West, but they would face them together, two people who had learned that the most precious things we carry are not seen with the eyes. 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Tabitha Whitley became Tabitha Holbrook in a simple ceremony at the Triple H Ranch House. Mrs. Winters outdid herself with a feast that drew compliments even from the taciturn Thomas. The territorial governor himself attended, pleased to have played a role in the events that brought the couple together. In the spring, as they had planned, Blake and Tabitha began renovating the cabin in the hidden valley, creating a retreat where they could escape the demands of the ranch when needed. Tabitha planted a garden that flourished under her care, just as she herself had flourished under Blake's. And if the townsfolk of Silver Gulch were surprised to see the once solitary girl who carried nothing transformed into a confident ranch wife, they kept their whispers to themselves. For Tabitha no longer walked empty-handed through life. She carried with her the love of a good man, the respect of those who knew her true worth, and the promise of a future built on understanding rather than judgment. In the end, she learned that some things are worth the risk of carrying, even in a world where loss is inevitable. For it is not the absence of pain that defines a life well lived, but the courage to open one's heart despite knowing its fragility. And in Blake's arms, beneath the vast Montana sky, Tabitha found that courage day after day, season after season, for all the years that stretched before them.